Alberta's brand new Premier Jason Kenney has less than a week on the job, and he's already scaring BC and taking on the federal government with one of the most competent cabinets I've ever seen in my entire life. But I'm very concerned about who Jason Kenney has appointed to be his Deputy Minister of the Policy Coordination Office. Jason Kenney needs to replace him immediately. Today I'll show you why that is and how you can help me push Jason Kenney in the right direction. For years and years, Mark Cameron has been one of Canada's leading carbon tax propagandists through his work as the Executive Director of Canadians for Clean Prosperity. Cameron was there until about 2 weeks ago, and for some inexplicable reason, right after Premier Jason Kenney and his highly competent cabinet were sworn in, Cameron was also appointed by Jason Kenney to become the Associate Deputy Minister of the Policy Coordination Office. Now, who exactly is Mark Cameron and what the heck is Canadians for Clean Prosperity? Well, friends, I'm really glad you asked because it's not good. According to Cameron's LinkedIn, Mark Cameron has held positions at BlackBerry, Ontario Power Generation, and he also spent 3 years, over a decade ago, doing policy and research in Stephen Harper's office. Okay, that sounds like a pretty decent conservative resume until you get to the Canadians for Clean Prosperity stuff. Canadians for Clean Prosperity is a pro-carbon tax nonprofit that exists to try to sell the ideas of carbon taxes on conservatives by trying to explain away a carbon tax as some sort of market-based solution for pollution, as opposed to the wealth transfer tax that does absolutely nothing but penalize Canadians for their lifestyle choices and for staying alive in our bitterly cold climate. This is from their About section. Clean Prosperity seeks to build enduring political support for market-based policies that generate growth while conserving our environment. We educate and influence governments, legislators, political, business, and other thought leaders, and give Canadians who share our vision the tools to influence their leaders and representatives. On the Clean Prosperity website, if you go to their op-ed page, it is article after published article about how good carbon taxes are and about how bad our friends in Saskatchewan and Ontario are for opposing dear Justin Trudeau's imposition of a nationwide carbon tax. Cameron himself even penned an op-ed published in Maclean's attacking Doug Ford for fighting back against the federal government's price on carbon. As Albertans are fighting through a recession made much worse by an NDP carbon tax, Cameron was scribbling out unfounded opinions that a carbon tax would not cause a nationwide recession. Well, I think we know that's absolutely untrue. Albertans and probably Jason Kenney himself can attest to that fact. Cameron has advocated for a carbon tax for everyone in the entire country and has continued to attack Alberta's strongest ally in the fight against Trudeau in Ontario. What sort of message does this send? Now, possibly my favorite op-ed written by Mark Cameron is one where he predicts Doug Ford's loss in Ontario because Doug Ford campaigned on ending cap and trade and opposing Justin Trudeau's carbon tax on all of us. I wonder if Cameron had the same ironclad predictions about his new boss, Jason Kenney, and Kenney's campaign positions on carbon pricing. If you go to Clean Prosperity's published articles, it is absolutely more of the same. Absolutely nothing except carbon tax promotion and attacking those who oppose carbon taxes, from Doug Ford to Scott Moe to Donald Trump. I mean, just look at this article here on Rachel Notley's carbon tax. You know, that's the one Jason Kenney explicitly campaigned on putting in the trash can of history as his very first bill. Canadians for Clean Prosperity is advocating for steady hikes in Notley's carbon tax and not a complete and total repealment as it should be. Look at this. Albertans know that their economy can't flourish unless measures are taken to curb the province's carbon emissions. That's why we are proposing a system that would significantly reduce emissions and help Alberta get much closer to its 2030 targets than current policies and projections. But here's where Mark Cameron moves from just being a true believer in the cult of social license and carbon taxes changing the weather to someone who has already been dangerous to the Alberta economy based on the company he keeps. The reason he's been dangerous is because of who Cameron appointed to his board of directors while he was executive director of Canadians for Clean Prosperity. Let me put this all together for you. It's a little complicated, but we'll get there. This is the Tides Foundation Canada Year in Review for 2017. Now, we all know that the Tides Foundation is part of the ongoing effort to landlock Alberta's oil and gas sector. You know what else I learned, though, researching this story here? It is much easier to find out who funds the Tides Foundation than it is to find out who funds Canadians for Clean Prosperity. Anyway, let's look at Tide's major donors for 2017. You see that right there? The Ivy Foundation? Well, the Ivy Foundation is headed up by a man named Bruce Laurie. He's actually the president of Ivy. You know what else Bruce Laurie does? Well, besides sitting on the board of directors at the vehemently anti-coal organization Physicians for the Environment and on the advisory board of Catherine McKenna's Eco-Fiscal Commission, he's also one of the founding directors of Canadians for Clean Prosperity. Look, I'm not attacking Jason Kenney, and I don't know Mark Cameron personally. I'm sure he's a nice enough guy, albeit wrong on so much, from the economy to carbon pricing to his electoral predictions or to how he stacked his board of directors at his nonprofit. And I knew that once he became premier, it would become the job of us here at The Rebel to make sure that Jason Kenney keeps his campaign promises and stays a true conservative. All the forces acting on Kenney right now are pulling him to the left. The pressure from the CBC, the mainstream media, progressives in his own party, and of course, time in office. All these things will help Kenney drift left, to repeat the mistakes of the former PC government. And those were the mistakes that led to the NDP coming into power. I guess it's my job to remind Kenney why he was elected by all of you. He was elected to repeal the carbon tax, and he's been openly advocating for an investigation into the sorts of foreign-motivated, foreign-funded groups that have been allowed to sabotage the oil and gas sector. You know, the kind of interference Cameron's own board of directors funded through the Ivy Foundation. In fact, Jason Kenney told exactly that to a Senate hearing on Monday in Edmonton about Justin Trudeau's tanker ban. Here is Alberta Liberal Senator Paula Simons saying so. Yet, on the very same day that Jason Kenney was saying that to a Senate hearing, proudly standing up for Alberta against foreign meddlers and the federal government's attacks on Alberta, Kenney was also appointing Mark Cameron, a shameless carbon tax advocate who himself appointed someone who is responsible for doling out cash to the Tides Foundation to his board of directors at Clean Prosperity. Mark Cameron is the kind of person Jason Kenney has promised to weed out of government, to inoculate our government against, and not infect our government with. Just weeks ago, Albertans were rightly outraged when Ed Whittingham from the foreign-funded Pembina Institute was appointed by Rachel Notley to the Alberta Energy Regulator. But Mark Cameron, he's our own Ed Whittingham, just from our side of the aisle. He appointed to his own board of directors a man who gives money to the Tides Foundation. And Tides, well, they give money to the likes of Ed Whittingham and the Pembina Institute. Let me say that one more time. Cameron put a guy who funds foreign meddlers on his board of directors at Canadians for Clean Prosperity, and he knowingly did it. Cameron is the kind of appointee that Catherine McKenna or Rachel Notley would make any day of the week. Is he really any different than, say, Gerald Butts, who was at the World Wildlife Fund, or Marlo Reynolds from the Pembina Institute? But Cameron, well, he might be even worse than those two because Mark Cameron likes to cloak himself in his former work in Stephen Harper's office to lend credibility for his ongoing support for Liberal and NDP climate policy. He trades on the earned respect of Harper to normalize his bad ideas to Conservatives. Cameron's goal, as his website says, was to influence government and politicians to adopt a carbon tax or carbon pricing. He used to do that from the outside. Now he gets to do it from the inside, and we get to pay him for it. Was there really no one else from Alberta available to be hired as the Deputy Minister of Policy Coordination? Anybody? Anyone whose ideas more closely aligned to those Albertans who actually voted for Jason Kenney than Mark Cameron from Canadians for Clean Prosperity? There was no one, really. There was no one who hasn't spent, the last half decade trying to pass off Catherine McKenna's ideas as good Conservative strategy. I thought when we got rid of Rachel Notley and her horrendous NDP, we were done with the colonial overlords from somewhere else telling us how to live our lives here in Alberta. But luckily for us, Premier Jason Kenney seems to be the kind of politician who actually listens to the people who voted for him. I like to think he's receptive to constructive criticism from his own side. So here's what I want you to do. First off, I want you to send a polite email to the Premier's office asking Jason Kenney to find somebody better, more aligned with the values that sent Jason Kenney to the Premier's office to be the Deputy Minister of Policy Development. No swears, don't be rude, just let Jason Kenney know how you feel. Here's the email, premier@gov.ab.ca. Secondarily, I have a petition calling on Premier Jason Kenney to replace Mark Cameron with someone who doesn't have a long history of supporting NDP and Liberal policies on carbon pricing. Someone who, doesn't have a long history of attacking our strongest allies in the fight against Trudeau. You can sign and share that petition at firecameron.com. And I'll hand deliver that petition to the Premier's office if they let me in the door. Let's send a message to Premier Jason Kenney that Albertans will have zero tolerance for a carbon tax, no matter who is pushing it on us. That's at firecameron.com. Please help me send a message to Premier Jason Kenney that we're watching and we're waiting for him to keep his promises to Albertans. I think there are better people for the job of Deputy Minister of Policy Coordination than a carbon tax propagandist like Mark Cameron. If you feel the same way, please sign and share my petition at firecameron.com.